us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have told you that I was a lucky man. I had a simple but good life, a steady job, a roof over my head, and most importantly, a wife I loved. I worked 2 jobs, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I believed in working hard, saving up, and building a future for us. It was tiring, but I didn't complain. I was doing it for us, for the life we were supposed to have together. We lived in a modest but comfortable home. Nothing fancy, nothing grand, but it was enough. I thought I had everything a man could ask for. A wife who smiled at me like I was her world. A partner who waited for me to come home after a long shift. Someone who would send me messages during the day, telling me she missed me, telling me to take care of myself, telling me she loved me. I believed her. I trusted her. You see, when you love someone, you don't question them. You don't sit around wondering if they're lying to you. You just believe. And that's what I did. I believed every word, every smile, every I love you. But not everything is as it seems. Love can make you blind, and I was no exception. I thought I had a perfect marriage. I thought I had a loyal wife. But the truth? The truth was something else entirely. And one day, I would wake up to a reality I never saw coming. It was just another evening, and I had just gotten home from work, my body aching from another long shift. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, and I was looking forward to a shower, a meal, and maybe a few hours of sleep before my next shift. That's when my neighbor called out to me. Now, let me be clear. I wasn't particularly close to any of my neighbors. Sure, I exchanged nods, maybe a quick "how's it going?" when I passed them, but that was it. No long conversations, no friendships, just the kind of distant, polite acknowledgement you give to people you live near. So when this man, an older guy, probably in his late 50s, the type who always sat on his porch watching the street, motioned for me to come over, I wasn't sure what to expect. I walked up to him, wiping sweat from my forehead. He looked uneasy. His eyes darted around like he was making sure no one else was listening. "Hey, look, I don't mean to cause trouble," he started, shifting in his seat. "And maybe it's none of my business, but I've noticed something. Your wife, she's been bringing a man home while you're at work." I blinked. Then I laughed. More out of disbelief than anything else. "A man?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Nah, if she brought someone home, it's probably just a relative. Maybe her cousin or something." He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just gave me this look I couldn't explain. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "I've seen him a few times. Same guy. And it's always when you're not around." I stood there, the air suddenly feeling heavier around me. For a second, I almost let his words get to me. Almost. But no. This was ridiculous. My wife? The woman who sent me messages throughout the day, reminding me to eat. The woman who kissed me every morning before I left for work? She wouldn't do something like that. I forced a chuckle, waving him off. "I appreciate the concern, really. But you must be mistaken." He hesitated like he wanted to say more, but finally just gave me a slow nod. "All right," he said. "Maybe I am." I walked away, shaking my head. I tried to shake it off. I did. That night, as I lay in bed, my neighbor's words kept replaying in my head. No matter how much I tried to push the thought away, it stuck with me. I told myself there was a logical explanation for everything. Maybe it was a relative, a friend from work, someone completely innocent. But even as I tried to convince myself, the thought wouldn't leave me. I needed to know, not because I thought she was guilty, but because I wanted to prove to myself that she wasn't. The next day, while she was out running errands, I set up these tiny cameras that have memory cards to store their footage. I didn't want to waste money buying anything too expensive. Not everywhere, just in a few places where I knew she wouldn't notice. I needed proof that my neighbor was wrong, that my wife was the woman I believed her to be. As I adjusted the last one, my hands shook slightly. I hated that I even had to consider this. But at the same time, it felt necessary. If she wasn't doing anything wrong, then what harm would it do? And if she was, then I needed to know. And so, I waited. Days passed before I finally checked the recordings. I had almost convinced myself that I wouldn't find anything, that the cameras had been a waste of time, and that I had let a stranger's words shake me for no reason. I sat down in front of my laptop and opened the files. The first few days' worth of footage was normal, just my wife moving around the house, watching TV, cooking dinner. Nothing suspicious. Nothing unusual. I felt a wave of relief settle over me. I should delete these and forget this ever happened. But I decided to watch the rest. That's when I saw it. My wife standing in our living room, smiling, pouring 2 glasses of wine. A man I had never seen before walked in. He wasn't a relative. He wasn't a friend. He was a stranger. With the way my wife greeted him, it was obvious. They were comfortable with each other. I kept watching as they moved to the couch, sitting too close. He leaned in and kissed her while slipping an arm around her waist. My chest tightened. Then they stood up, holding hands, and went upstairs to our bedroom. My breath hitched. My throat felt dry. But I didn't look away. I watched as they disappeared into the room I had shared with my wife for years. I stared at the empty hallway, at the closed door, knowing exactly what was happening behind it. The details hit me like a punch to the gut. After a while, the man came out wearing my bathrobe, the one I used every morning after a shower. I had to pause the video and close my eyes just to breathe. I sat there for a long time, feeling empty. I could have confronted her. I could have asked her why she had done this, why she had lied to me, why she had let another man into our home, but why give her the satisfaction of explaining away? I knew how it would play out. She would lie, twist the truth, cry and beg, and say all the right things. She would tell me it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that she still loved me. Maybe she would even try to make me feel guilty, say I had been too busy working, that I hadn't paid enough attention to her, that it was my fault she had done this. No, I wouldn't give her that chance. I wouldn't give her any reaction at all. Instead, I made a decision, not to argue, not to fight, not to give her a single clue that I knew. So I started planning. Once I decided to leave, I knew I had to do it right. This wasn't just about walking away. I had to erase myself completely. No loose ends. No way for her to track me down. The first thing I did was start saving every extra penny from my 2 jobs. I had always been the one handling our finances, so moving money around wouldn't look strange. I tightened my spending, skipped unnecessary expenses, and made sure to stash away every bit of cash I could. My wife never noticed. She was too distracted, too caught up in her own world to know what was going on. Next, I opened a private account in one of this global payment solution. I knew that if I drained our joint account all at once, it would set off alarms. So, I started small. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, gradual transfers that wouldn't raise suspicion. Bit by bit, I moved my share of our savings into the new account, ensuring that when I left, I wouldn't be walking away with nothing. The credit cards came next. We shared a few, and I knew I had to sever that connection. I told her I was switching banks, and that I wanted to consolidate our accounts for better management. She barely listened. As long as she had access to what she needed, she didn't care about the details. One by one, I shut them down, making sure that when I was gone, she wouldn't have the ability to track my movements through financial transactions. Quitting my jobs was the final step. I put in my resignation quietly, making sure to leave on good terms so no one would have a reason to look for me later. I told my boss I was moving on to something better, a new opportunity in another city. My coworkers wished me well, shook my hand, and told me to keep in touch. They had no idea that once I walked out of that office, they would never hear from me again. And through all of it, my wife was completely oblivious. And at the same time, she was still seeing him, still bringing him into our home, still using our bed for something it was never meant for. The night before I left, I sat in our living room for the last time. I looked around at everything, taking it all in one last time. This isn't my home anymore. It's a place where I was made a fool. I reached for my wedding ring, the simple gold band that had symbolized love, commitment, and a promise that had never been kept. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling its weight one last time before discarding it. I didn't need it where I was going. At 4:30 a.m., I stood at the door with my bag slung over my shoulder. No hesitation. No second thoughts. I turned the handle and stepped outside, letting the door close behind me with a quiet click. I didn't look back. Not once. By the time the sun rose, I was already gone. I didn't know it at the time, but I later found out how it all unfolded for her. How one morning, she woke up and found that the bed beside her was empty. At first, she probably thought nothing of it. But when she went through the house, expecting to find me getting ready or in the shower, that's when the sinking feeling started to creep in. I found out that she walked through the house, calling my name, growing more frantic as the silence stretched on. She probably checked the usual places, but I wasn't there. My things weren't there either. My boots were gone, my jacket was missing, and the spot where I always left my keys by the door was empty. She called my phone, no answer. It went straight to voicemail. A few more calls and still nothing. Panicking, she dialed my work, but that's when she was told I had quit last week. In that moment, she must have known that something wasn't right. I had been gone, and I had disappeared without leaving a trace. Then came the final blow. She rushed to the bank and found that our joint account had been drained. By the time she figured it out, there was hardly anything left. It was at that moment, when the bank told her the truth, that she realized I hadn't just left. I had erased myself from her life completely. I didn't know how long she searched for me. I didn't know the depths of her desperation, or how far she went to find me. But over time I learned the details. She hired a private investigator, spent money she probably couldn't afford, throwing herself into a search for someone who had already made sure there was no trace left behind. The harder she looked, the more she realized how deeply I had planned my exit. Every move I made was deliberate. Every step was calculated. And as time went on, I heard that regret consumed her. She couldn't fix it, couldn't explain it, couldn't even beg for forgiveness. There was no opportunity for any of that. She had no one to blame but herself. And maybe that was the worst part of it, knowing she could never make up for what she had done. While she was searching, I was already somewhere else. I found a place far away from the country, from everything that had tied me to the past. I settled on an island in the Caribbean where no one knew my name, and the pace of life was different, slower, quieter. I found peace there, something I hadn't even known I was missing. At first, I lived alone, enjoying the solitude. The quiet became my refuge, but eventually I met someone. She wasn't like the others. She was kind, understanding, and best of all, she respected me for who I was. I felt what real love should be like, simple, honest, and genuine. We built a life together, one that was built on mutual respect. And when our daughter was born, I knew I had made the right decision. This was the family I had always wanted. The family I thought I would never have again. The future I deserved. And that old life, it was gone. For good. Years passed before she found me. I wasn't hiding anymore, not really. By then I had moved on, built something new, something real. My life in the Caribbean had become everything my past life wasn't: peaceful, honest, and free from the weight of betrayal. I had a family now, a wife who truly loved me, a daughter who was my entire world. I had stopped thinking about my past. It no longer had power over me. Until the day it came knocking. I didn't see her first, she saw me. I later learned that eventually she found me. She flew to my new home. And then she saw me. I was outside, just like any other day, standing by the market, holding my daughter's hand as she tugged at me excitedly, pointing at something she wanted. And that was when my past finally caught up with me. She must have stood there, watching, processing what she was seeing. This wasn't what she expected. Maybe she thought I'd still be broken, still bitter, still carrying the weight of what she had done to me. Maybe she thought I had spent all these years looking over my shoulder, unable to move on. Instead, she found me happy, whole, completely untouched by the pain she had left behind. There she was, my past standing in front of me. She had traveled all this way, spent all these years searching, and yet now that she was standing in front of me, she didn't seem to know what to do. She took a step closer, her lips parted, but no words came out. She whispered my name, her voice barely above a breath. A plea, a last, desperate attempt to reach something, anything, that still connected us. I tilted my head slightly, studying her like she was a stranger, because that's exactly what she was. For a moment, she searched my face, looking for recognition, for emotion, for something that told her I still remembered, that I still cared. But all she found was emptiness. I let the silence stretch between us, long enough for the truth to sink in. Then, finally, I spoke. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The words hit her harder than any scream, any accusation, any angry confrontation ever could. She blinked, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Defeat. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't give her a chance to explain, to cry, to beg. I simply turned around. I took my daughter's hand and walked away. And I never looked back. As I walked away, I felt nothing, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally realize that the past has no power over you anymore. There was a time when I thought I would never heal, that the betrayal would haunt me forever. Her betrayal had erased everything we once had. Years of love, trust, and shared memories, all undone by a single choice. But that was the past, a closed chapter, and I had no interest in reopening it. Some betrayals are not meant to be forgiven, only forgotten. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her? Would you have left the way I did? Or would you have handled things differently? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it.